We're
Are you gonna
joking.
do an intro this time?
Yeah,
What?
what's your YouTube personality? Hey guys, just done with my
I
COD.
think you got it all down, Blair.
Okay. So there's this movie that Mike Birbiglia made. I think it's the second movie that he made called Don't Think Twice, which is, have any of you seen it?
No.
Yeah. No.
Okay. For some reason, I was like, if anyone's gonna have seen it, it's gonna be Michael. But it's this, it's a movie about like an improv team. And it's kind of like shot, it's like a really intimate movie, and it's very much like an indie. But it's just about these people's lives, and like one or two of the people in the improv team start to get famous. They literally have a thing that's Weekend Live is the show that they all want to be on. And so it's sort of about like friendships and relationships and how like growing up impacts all that, because this is all people who are like in their like mid to late 20s and sort of getting past the point where you can sort of be following your dream without being like, oh, but like all of my life is also happening and I should probably start like figuring out whatever. And like there's like a lot of sort of like things that happen in these people's lives, and you sort of see all of their relationships intertwined, and it's got this like one of the most beautiful endings of all time that I've ever seen. Like it's just one of my favorite ways to like end a movie in this like really bittersweet way that like is more sweet than bitter, but is still really real and like grounded and like kind of beautiful. And like, you know, and obviously I was on an improv team, so I know like I'm very connected to that like world and the idea of bonding and the idea of like having a group mind and the idea of like things ending and what you can take from it and all of that stuff. And I watched that movie and I just was like, if I was to ever make like a first movie, or like if I was to be able to say that like I had anything to do with that movie, like I would be so proud, because it was almost exactly what I didn't know I would want to make a movie about.
Cool. I think it's a tough question for me to answer, because I think that there's like, I go through different like phases and styles of like things that I like. And so like there's something like, you know, if I think one of the best like big opener movies that someone's ever made, you know, of course he did Duel before, but like Spielberg on Jaws was really a movie that made him, which I think is an incredible way to start a career. But I think if I go for like something that's sort of like the magnum opus that I think is really incredible, I think Tree of Life to me is something that's really like there's just something about that movie that I think I look at it and I go like, yeah, I would have shot that scene exactly as he shot, like the kind of wandering camera. And it's one of those things that like feels very different from a lot of his other work, but also feels very similar. And just the style of like behind the scenes, where it was just essentially, you know, he'd be like, go play, kids. I'm just gonna like, we're just gonna follow you with a camera and let them kind of live out their boyhoods and on camera. Not to a literal degree like Boyhood, but to an extent that felt to me just so authentic. Like that's one of those movies that you can kind of pick out any scene from and watch it, and it seems like just like almost like a poem. And then you take it to the level of where the visual effects with Douglas Trumbull and how it gets very, you know, large and existential. And it's a lot of themes that I think in a movie that I was like building my career towards, I think that I would really happily include. I think it would be kind of an interesting way to culminate a career. And I think that, you know, aside from that, it's also a really, you know, enjoyable movie to me.
I like living in relative obscurity, so I'd like to make something that like to have made something that kind of floated under the radar, you know, that I can just share with friends. I don't want to project too much onto people that make castle siege or bottle scenarios, but because I'm sure that plenty of stuff goes wrong on those sets and tensions can always run high. But I can't even think of one specific film, but just something specific to that kind of story, like an Assault on Precinct 13 or Night of the Living Dead type scenario, where you're like, okay, we have our one setting, and we're going to shoot the rest of this on sidewalks and maybe a park. And that's about as ambitious as the film gets. And hopefully the story will speak for itself and shine through what the production values might not communicate. I know that's a pretty underwhelming answer, but that's, I don't make masterpieces. I just make like lesser films by really good filmmakers.
I mean, it's a hard question, and I mean, I did ask the question, and here I'm sitting going like, there's a number I was like cycling through, and I think I ended up deciding on the one that, for the longest time, going through film school, people are like, okay, what's your favorite film? And it was hard to answer that until I'm like, you know what, I'll decide something. So I chose High and Low, which is a 1963 film by Akira Kurosawa. And it's based on a novel by Ed McBain called King's Ransom. And it's about a man who has worked at a shoe company his whole life, and he is about to take over the shoe company. He has all the stocks he needs, he has all the support he needs, and he has all the money he needs. And then his chauffeur's child is kidnapped, thinking it's his child. And there is a moral quandary there, and it's very Shakespearean in its morality and like how that first sequence is shot. And then there is a train sequence, which is also something I really like, that transitions it to the second part of the movie. Which also, another thing I like about films is that films that are almost two separate movies tied together, but like it doesn't feel like an anthology piece. It feels like it is the same narrative, but it feels like the instincts of the filmmaking are two separate pieces. So it essentially goes from this higher Shakespearean drama to this idea of like a Law and Order Tokyo, and the imagery gets so crazy, and there's so much interesting stuff in there. Like they go through the slums, and you see like people on drugs wandering with like dead eyes, and just the cinematography that is incredible. It's a stunning film, and I wish I made it. It's funny that like, having asked this question, I also realized like it's a really hard question to properly answer, because in some way you have to absorb, like you're like, whose language do I want to like aspire to in some manners, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I feel like we are the sum of all things we love, but it's hard to just say just this one piece, right?
Well, that's why.
So I think it's people's tendency to get really self-effacing when asked that kind of a question. Because I mean, some people might be quick to jump to say, I wish I made what is lumped in the canon of, say, like greatest films of all time. But I mean, I don't know. I'm just kind of like, I'd rather make something that, you know, could be appreciated in the long term, if known at all. I cut you off, Mandy. I'm sorry about that.
No. I was like, it's kind of on a similar point. Like, I like, when I first heard the question, I was almost like, well, do you just say your favorite movie? But at the same time, there's almost like a part of like I always say my favorite movie is Birdman, but I don't think it would be my favorite movie if I made it. Like, it's almost part of the reason that, like, I mean, that also, like, it just, to me as a filmmaker, like, I think it's really ambitious and, like, interesting, and I think that he uses, like, he uses, like, so many strategies and tactics and whatever the fuck they're called, like, film techniques, to, like, tell the story in, like, a really effective and, like, interesting way, but at the same time, there are, like, there's almost this level of, like, if I was to want to direct a movie, like, I don't think I'd want to do something like that, like, especially knowing that I'm like, he shot that in, like, 28 days, like, no thank you, like, holy fuck, no thank you, like, and even, like, I'm like, I would like to have directed, like, The Big Chill, I think that, although I find kind of parts of that movie, like, kind of weird, and I'm like, I don't know if I would have wanted to tell that story in the same way, like, I know people love that movie, but, you know, like, I think that there were some weird moments in it that I was like, oh, okay, and everyone's just fine with this.
Yeah, there's also like aspects of like filmmakers that like I wouldn't think of like, oh, I exactly want to make that film, but if I could do like scene structure and if I could be even close to what Kenneth Lonergan does in his films, I'd be like, yeah, that's incredible, because like I find his ability to create like really human characters and really human conflict unbelievable in a way of like being able to just creates story that doesn't feel like you need a man to walk into a room with a gun to create conflict. You can you can depict conflict between human beings. Like,
well, there's even really like genre examples too. I think that's the difficulty with me answering this question, is that like, because I think we're all fans of genre filmmaking, but like I would have been super happy to have stamped my name on like something like The Old Man and the Gun, Lowry's from 2017 or 2018. And like that, just again, it's another one of those movies that I think that like stylistically very, very different from something like Tree of Life. But because of the genre and the context in which it's working, I feel like it's one of those things where it's like I could see myself making the same decisions as Lowry and shooting it the same way and choosing the same techniques, as Mandy so eloquently put, to execute.
What I think is interesting in all of our selections is the fact that none of us chose like largely heralded films. Like I didn't choose one of Kurosawa's best. Like to choose a film by Carpenter that's like not even one of the like as you were saying, Michael, is not like bottle. Those guys don't. The bottle ones don't often sell very huge. And like, I mean, again, Malick, you chose Malick, Tree of Life, which did sell quite well, but again, didn't feel like a big blockbuster, right? And like,
No,
yeah. I think that's an interesting idea to think about, is the fact that none of us really chose
well, the genre is accessible because usually you, the audience, can on some level intuit like the construction of a scene, right? Because you are on some level, you might not be able to articulate it, but a lot of people are literate in the grammar of genre, right? I mean, like Richard Franklin's like DVD commentaries are really excellent for this on like Road Games and Psycho 2, where basically he, I don't want to put words in his mouth, but he sort of talks about just like you're able to conceive of a sequence of events in a way that's fairly universal. Like you just go, guy looks up, you cut to the thing he's looking at, you look downward, you cut back to him, he's down already. Like it's something that everybody can get. And I think why genre is accessible for people to say like, oh, I probably would have made that, is because you go, yeah, I think that most people would have made those decisions. And that's not to be dismissive to Frank. I think he's an awesome film.
Well, I think it's also interesting. As far as I can tell, none of us chose like our favorite movie.
No,
like I mean, I chose one that I say is
one of mine.
Favorite movies.
Same with me. Like I love Tree of Life a lot, but I would never say it's the all-time favorite of mine. But I think that it's interesting how that happens. How like it's kind of rare that you watch a movie and you go like, oh yeah, that feels right, and it feels like me in a way. Like it's kind of it's weird. I get that with documentaries sometimes too, like where I'll be watching a documentary and I'll kind of go, oh, the decision there is actually really interesting, and it's something that I connect with on a kind of impulse level, as opposed to just going, that's a good decision. Yeah.
Well, and there was almost like I almost initially went to like Edgar Wright. Like anything Edgar Wright does, I think is like, because he has such a specific and like distinct style, I feel like you can watch most of his movies and there's like a clear sort of like thread or like a clear like style that sort of is like in a lot of them, and even just in the sort of shots that he likes to use and all of that. Like he does transitions better than any sort of person, but at the same time it's like I can almost see some of those decisions like on the day being contested, and there is like a part of my brain that like, I have like enough like self-humility to be like, I probably wouldn't have like made those calls. Like I don't think I would have been able to make a movie like that. Like I almost, when I watched Don't Think Twice, there was a part of me that was like, I think I would tell this story in the same type of way and in the way that he uses like the camera and the types of conversations that he has and the things that he shows and the things that he doesn't show that happens in these people's lives. Like I was like, I can't really imagine this story in a different way if I was to tell it, especially because it's material that I'm familiar with. Like it's a type of movie that I could imagine myself making. Like I loved my improv team and it was a huge part of my life.